Why do I have them on here? Because personally, I miss talking to these guys, and they're two of the best sports writers covering the ACC landscape. However, Brett does concentrate on NC State. Andrew does concentrate on. Andrew runs the Tar Heel Illustrated Global conglomerate. Brett writes for North State Journal. He's written for Sports Illustrated, a bunch of publications. He actually writes for whoever wants him to write for, but he puts out some really great stuff. Reason we're here is I miss talking to these guys, and they're probably some of the most knowledgeable people about what's been going on in the ACC. Purpose of today's call, this video, is this live stream. Talk about ACC Roundup. 2020 has been a weird year, so we got a whole bunch of topics to cover over. These two guys primarily talk because they are the brains that know what's going on. I just take pictures, but I love listening to them talk. So let's kick this off. Let's start off with the ACC Football Championship game. It was this Saturday, Clemson versus Notre Dame, a rematch. Clemson did a pretty good job. Brett, want to start off? What was your impressions of the game?
It went pretty much as expected. I didn't think it was going to be as big of a blowout, but I did think Clemson was going to win because the first matchup in South Bend, you have to remember, not only did Trevor Lawrence not play, but James Skalski and Tyler Davis, and there were several starters on the defensive side of the ball that didn't play for Clemson because of either injury or COVID-19. And they had their full complement of stars back, and they were by far the better team. And, I thought Notre Dame did it by, with smoke and mirrors for most of the season anyway. And as an ACC guy, I was glad to see it happen because, you don't want the interloper to come in and the 1 year that they're there, Notre Dame wins it. And now they're going to say, oh, look, the ACC, we don't need them. So it went about as the way I expected. What about you, AJ?
I don't think Notre Dame did it with smoke and mirrors during the season. I saw them in Chapel Hill, and that was one of the most professional college teams I'd seen in a while. Well, let's face it, I've been watching Coastal Division football for a while, so professional and that division usually aren't two things that go hand in hand. That said, I thought Notre Dame was going to get handled by Clemson because I think that highly of Clemson. And to what you said, the Tigers didn't have their full complement of guys in November, and you almost wonder if there was a bit of gamesmanship involved with that because, if certain guys could come back super quickly and play, you would wonder that if maybe if you could make the trip to South Bend, maybe you can play. And I only throw that out there because I know where your allegiance is in South Carolina, Brett, and I figured you would have an interesting comment about that. I'm only throwing it out there. I'm not saying I think that's what's actually happened. But in all seriousness, as far as the Notre Dame ACC factor goes, I agree. If they would have won, the league would have taken a hit nationally. But if the end game is to get Notre Dame in the ACC full-time for football, this was the perfect scenario.
Yep.
Play a pretty interesting schedule. There's enough teams in the league scattered around the eastern half of the United States that Notre Dame could still spread its footprint around. But guess what? Notre Dame losing as an independent, they're not getting in.
Absolutely. And
but losing in the ACC in a championship game and getting Clemson on the schedule twice, that's what got them in. And I think that Notre Dame people have realized the last 4 months that Notre Dame could be in a conference, and every morning when they wake up, the sun rises with them. The world really hasn't changed that much in that sense, and they can survive and enjoy life actually being associated with a conference. And
I think it's a good deal. I think Notre Dame is eventually going to be in the ACC full-time in football sooner than later. And a couple of reasons why. First of all, the revenue sharing situation that allowed them to be in the league this year, I think is huge because when their TV contract with NBC comes back up, they're going to be able to work something out similar to that. But even more important, with the new commissioner of the ACC, Jim Phillips, coming in, he's coming in as the athletic director at Northwestern, but he spent 8 years at Notre Dame as an assistant to Kevin White, who is now the AD at Duke. And he also worked at Notre Dame with both Boo Corrigan at NC State and Bubba Cunningham at UNC. I think the moon and the stars are aligning that eventually, and so, like I said, sooner than later. And the fact that they got into the playoff, even though they lost, because of the schedule they played in the ACC. I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to happen soon.
The TV element is interesting because it's one that I don't think a lot of people have hashed out a lot. But with the SEC inking that huge deal recently with Disney, that's going to shove the ACC to the side a little bit on ABC, especially primetime opportunities. You know, Carolina played in several primetime ABC games, or a few primetime ABC games this year. And those opportunities are going to be fewer and fewer moving down the road. So guess what? How about bring Notre Dame in? They get to keep their contract. And then the NBC will bring on a bunch of other ACC games. So suddenly Saturday nights in college football or late Saturday afternoons, you could also have the ACC over on NBC. And they have their ABC contract. And the ACC go to ESPN and Disney and say, hey, look what you did signing that SEC deal. We didn't know that deal was in place when we signed our deal. So we got to go get some of ours too. We'll hang out with you guys, but we need to go put our footprint somewhere else too, because they remember the SEC had this TBS and ABC deal at the same time as well, ESPN deal. So I think this gives the ACC a little bit more leverage. I think it will allow Notre Dame to keep their deal, but then add to it what the ACC gets on top of it.
And oh, by the way, Disney will go for that too, because what you're doing is you're going to be adding 6 games of Notre Dame content when they play in ACC. So, everybody wins in that.
Yeah, can you imagine? So, okay, you want 6 Notre Dame games ABC, and you still want Clemson?
Yeah.
Pony up, boys.
And by the way, I think that this year playing 10 conference games is going to be the gateway to expanding the conference schedule. I would be shocked if they don't announce that starting either next year or the year after, they go to 9 conference games on a regular basis, because it's more inventory.
What's going to happen to the smaller schools that depend on those extra games for the revenue? And again, we don't want to get too much into the weeds, but what's your overall impression? What's going to happen to schools?
In what other walk of life does a highly successful business is it saddled with the responsibility of taking care of less successful businesses, smaller businesses? We don't live in that world outside of college sports, but every time you ask a coach about it, and I don't know how many head coaches I've covered in the ACC, not just at UNC, but at Duke and State and Wake Forest and around the league, Clemson, FSU, they always say the same thing. Well, to paraphrase, we want to take care of little guys. They need to get those checks. Why is it their responsibility to do that? They want wins. They want easy wins. Kentucky's 4-6 going to the Gator Bowl this year, and a lot of people are critical of that. But in a regular year, they would have loaded up with Morehead State a few times, and they'd have a 6-6 record, and it would look a lot better. No one would be criticizing them, but they'd be the same damn football team. The coaches don't want to lose games. That's why they want those games, and they're willing to spend $900,000 to give to Georgia Southern or really the FCS schools to give to Wofford to come on in to get a beating so they can get a W and feel better around the boosters in the spring when they're on the rubber chicken circuit.
I don't know if it's going to happen because it's too logical, but the answer to this is you play your 12-game schedule with 9 conference games, but you allow teams to play like they do in basketball, an exhibition game. But it's got to be against either an FCS team or a group of 5 or whatever. But one of those teams that you're going to pay that guarantee, they get to come in and they get their guarantee. You get to play an exhibition game that gets you ready for the regular season in those 12 tougher games, and you get to use all your players. You get to give guys experience. You get to bring in freshmen that don't. You don't have to use that game against them. You could possibly redshirt them. So I think that's the way to go. Whether it actually happens or not, we'll see.
I'm a proponent of 10 conference games. That way if you have a rival, non-conference rival like Clemson and South Carolina, you can still play that. And then go ahead and play Louisiana Monroe. I mean, Louisiana Monroe is going to play 35 games a year. They're going to be everybody's opponent every week because you got to get that one so-called easy game. But no FCS. Any game against an FCS team should simply not count. And next year, when we return to norm, you have to play the same number of games as other teams in order to qualify for the CFP. They need more information to make the best choices for the CFP, especially when they expand this thing to 8, because it's going to 8. And what I always laugh about is when people say, well, gosh, if they just went to 8, then the 15 Texas A&M would get in. But then the argument be over 8 and 9. Who's the 9th team that got shafted? We need more intel.
You know what?
College basketball is a beautiful. Hold on, Brett. College basketball is a beautiful thing because the preseason, the non-conference schedule gives us a ton of intel. And then we get to see how everybody does in their league. College football, we don't really get that very much. And if they go to 10 conference games, as big as these leagues are, they're going to be playing a lot of good teams, a lot of different teams. Everyone's going to have to play 5 true road games a year. Some years they're going to have to play 6. I think it's a better way of determining who belongs in that championship. Don't worry about the little guys anymore. You got to get the best 4 teams, the best 8 teams in there, and goodness knows it's probably going to grow beyond that. And the only way to fairly do it, most accurately do it, is to have more intel.
The reason they won't do that, the reason they won't go to 10 conference games is because that would then eliminate the possibility of the Chick-fil-A Classic or the Duke's Mayo Bowl Classic at the beginning of the season. Those made-for-TV matchups like UNC and Auburn was supposed to have been this year. I think that would kind of legislate those out of existence. So I think 9 is probably where it would end up getting capped.
But why do we need those?
Well, why do we need those?
But
what do you think?
Okay, but for the sake of discussion, let's say, remember NC State played Tennessee a few years ago in one of those games. I think it was Mike Glennon's senior year. They played on a Friday night because they can't play a doubleheader there, and they're stuffing a bunch of games into Atlanta early in the season. Does NC State benefit more from that or having a home game against a group of 5 type team where they get 57,000 people in Carter Finley Stadium? Their boosters are there. They sell all the merchandise. They sell all the gear. Now since everybody's selling beer, they can load up. A late August, early September night game at Carter Finley Stadium against somebody, they're going to sell a crap load of beer and make a lot of money. I bet you it's more advantageous and financially better off if they have a home game.
That might be the case, but you have to weigh that against the fact that game is going to be buried on some regional sports network or the ACC network, as opposed to being on the mothership on ESPN where everybody can see it. And if you happen to beat that Tennessee or whoever you're playing, think about the impact on recruiting.
Those games get lost now. I covered the Georgia-Carolina game in the Georgia Dome a few years ago. It started at 5:30. So the first half of the game, it was going on when the end of the 3:30 games were taking place. And the second half of the game was going on when some huge, Oregon, Oklahoma type game was going on ABC. So there's so many of these games, they get lost now. I say play home.
And you're out on the recruiting trail, okay? Are you going to say, we're going to get games on, you're going to be able to be seen nationwide on ESPN. We're going to have you coast to coast on TV, or we're going to have you on this nice little regional network, and people, whether it's true or not, kids,
they're going to be on TV
like that. They're going to be on TV. I'm going to be on ESPN.
Yeah, they're going to be on TV, Brett, and they're going to be on. If they win games, they're going to be on bigger networks. They're going to be. On
I just don't think that's going to happen.
Having covered recruiting closely in the last 6.5 years at THI, and really understanding how it works, you have a night game, a 6 p.m. start against whoever, just no FCS. And the place is wild, and tailgating's been going on since 1 o'clock, which happens over there. They have great tailgating, and you get to bring in 85 recruits to experience a home atmosphere. That's going to do more for you than being one of 19 games on all these different ESPN and Fox channels.
That may be the case, but I'm just telling you, there is so much money involved that I don't think you're going to see those games go away.
Gene, this is your thing. You got to chime in now, Gene.
I was going to say, I'm exactly going to chime in right now because this could go on for a whole hour, so I'm going to have to separate you two. But no, look, folks.
This is what our drive. Hold on, Gene. You went on a trip with us to Virginia a couple of years ago, and that was a short trip, believe me.
Yeah, I know.
I told you, this is what our drives. Brett and I have driven to the mountains of West Virginia in the middle of the night, and this is what it's like.
AJ, did we hit anything on that trip to Virginia when Gene was there, or did we?
No, that was another one. That was when the deer beat up my car that one night. That was after a basketball game at UNC. Like 3 o'clock in the morning.
You can see why I love these two guys. I mean, you're getting to hear the stuff I hear, and I'm sitting there in the press box getting ready to listen. But no, we've got to move on because there's a bunch of stuff to cover. I got a list here. And again, if we don't run out of it, this is fine because, folks, you are not going to hear a whole bunch of this stuff anywhere else. This is all unscripted. I do have a little agenda to kind of keep things moving along because the next thing we're going to talk about is ACC Bowl Games. What I've seen, and let me just run through these real quick before we get into the New Year's Bowl games, but there's the Cheez-It Bowl in Phoenix. That's Miami versus Oklahoma. Some of the Miami folks are like, hey, this is not a game we should be in. We should be in the Orange Bowl. You got the December 30th. The former Belks Bowl game is now the Duke-Mayo Bowl for folks outside the South. That's like Dukes versus Hellman's a big argument. That's Wake Forest versus Wisconsin. That's a noontime game. And then January 2nd, you've got the Gator Bowl, which is NC State versus Kentucky, noontime game on ESPN. Gentlemen, who wants to start? I think, okay, Brett, go ahead and start.
No, let AJ do it. I started last time.
All right, AJ, go ahead.
I was raised in Virginia. I've lived most of my life in the South, but I'm a Hellman's guy, so there's that.
It's not a tomato sandwich unless it has Duke's mayonnaise.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
If Miami fans think they belong in the Orange Bowl, don't get steamrolled at home. Yeah, I was there for that game, and Carolina. Carolina hasn't whipped a lot of people at the line of scrimmage over the last 20 years, and they, teams of substance, and they absolutely whipped Miami at the line of scrimmage. Miami was playing for something. The excuse that, well, they knew they're going in, they weren't going to play for the ACC Championship. I don't know who ever thought they were going to anyway. After Notre Dame went into Chapel Hill and took care of business, it was pretty clear what the ACC Championship game was going to be, and Miami still had a lot to play for. They're trying to ascend the same way UNC is trying to ascend, so every game matters. Miami has a lot to prove. The last 15 years, Miami's sort of taken on this perception that, it's almost like a pretender. It's totally the opposite of what it was from the mid 80s up through the early 2000s, and that Miami can't win the big game, which is pretty amazing. And that was an opportunity for Miami to put the hammer down against a Coastal Division foe that it is clearly going to be neck and neck with the next few years, trying to, for Coastal Division supremacy. And the Tar Heels just whipped them. So Carolina didn't back into the Orange Bowl. Carolina worked its way. They earned its way into the Orange Bowl. As far as the NC State Gator Bowl, I'm thrilled that NC State got that game. I think Dave Doran deserves more credit for the job that he did this year than he's getting from a lot of people. To win 8 games with Bailey Hogman at quarterback, the team that I saw on TV when they went up to Blacksburg, there was no way on earth that looked like an 8-win team. They didn't look like a 5-win team that night. And to get 8 wins and to be the club that finally knocked Liberty off its perch, which I think was an extremely important win, not just for State, but for the ACC. I think NC State deserves the Gator Bowl. I just wish they were playing a better opponent so they can actually say, hey, we beat a pretty good team in that bowl game. The Gator Bowl isn't what it once was, unfortunately, Brett. And you can say that about a lot of bowl games, but I'm glad that State is in that game. That's an awesome opportunity for them to pick up a 9th win. And I think the last time they were in the Gator Bowl, wasn't that when they beat Notre Dame?
Nope. Texas A&M throttled them.
Texas A&M. That's right, 2 years ago. That's right.
Chubb and a couple of those other guys opted out.
That's right. They opted out. Well, see, I forgot that because I covered NC State when they were in the Gator Bowl against Notre Dame and the parade and Phillip Rivers and all that great stuff. So maybe I just conveniently forgot the A&M game.
Well, first of all, the entire bowl system is kind of crazy to begin with. But this year it's a total clown show, and I use that term because I can't use what I really want to use here on a family show. So,
hey, by the way, did you see where Armando Bacot used that word the other day with us? He used that S word.
But going back to NC State, this even though they're playing a team with a 4-6 record, 4 of those 6 losses by Kentucky were to teams that were ranked in the top 10 at the time that they played. So this is a really important game for NC State. In fact, I think Kentucky is favored right now. NC State really needs to win this game because it's not going to be a good look if they lose to a team with a losing record. That having been said, this kind of sets up for State just the way the regular season did. Because if you look at the schedule that the Wolfpack got, no Notre Dame, no Clemson. The only one of the top 4 teams that they played, I think, was UNC, and actually Miami also, and they almost beat Miami. But they got the most favorable possible schedule this year, and they took advantage of it. So good for them. So, for NC State fans saying that the ACC, has a thing against them and they never get any breaks. Well, they did this year. And, like you said, good for Doran, good for that entire program. They took advantage of it. So, to win that game and to have 9 wins for the 3rd time in the last 4 years is really a great accomplishment. And it sets them up for a really good start to next year when you'll have basically everybody back, including their starting quarterback, Devin Leary. As far as UNC is concerned, the fact that Chaz Surratt, Michael Carter, and De'Ami Brown are opting out, that kind of concerns me. Not necessarily the offensive guys, because as long as Javonte Williams and Daz Newsome are playing, then they'll still have weapons for Sam Howell. But that defense, Chaz is the heart and soul of that thing, and it concerns me that he's not playing, because they're going to have to put up a big number to win that game. And Texas A&M thinks that it should have been in a New Year's Six. Texas A&M thinks it should be in the playoff. And there are two ways of looking at this. Either you go in and say, why are we in this game? We don't deserve to be here, and they go through the motions. But if you look at the way Texas A&M played 2 years ago in the Gator Bowl against NC State in a game that they thought that they got shafted for the New Year's Six, history says they're gonna bring their A game, and if that happens, Carolina could be in for a long afternoon. And as far as Wake is concerned in Charlotte, good for the Deacons. They haven't played a home game since I believe it's October 24th. They played one game period since Halloween. Those kids deserve to play, and even though they're 4-4 and they've only played 8 games, Wake Forest deserves that. And to play it close to home, where maybe some fans are able to come, that's a good situation for them. And to play a Wisconsin team that's played 6 games, they're also 3-3, and I think is overrated because they're in the Big Ten. I think Wake's got a great chance to win that game, and so I like that matchup. But as far as the situation is, when you have teams that are 2-8 that are playing in bowls, what's the point? I mean, why?
No. By the way, I got you on state schedule. They do have 2 wins over ranked teams, though, and that's something, and that's not.
It is something, but the fact that they didn't have to play either Clemson or Notre Dame.
Oh, I know,
is
no
still
doubt.
Huge.
But I think they've still proven that they would certainly have a winning record, even if they did have to play those teams. I think Wake. You and I talked about Clawson maybe a week ago. I love what he's done there, and he's got a culture. And when a coach has enough successes around long enough where his program is literally a culture, a living, breathing culture, that's a good thing. And culture can carry you through tough times. Culture can carry you when your best wide receiver opts out. Culture can carry you when your quarterback decides to bolt, go somewhere else, and then you stick it out there. And there's some concerns about how Wake was going to move the ball and all that kind of stuff. And the Deacons were able to do it. They got a 4-4 season. I think they were better. If you watched Wake, they were better than what most people expected. And that's got Dave Clawson's fingerprints and DNA all over it. That's what that program is.
Think about this,
when Jim Grove got hired, Wake Forest was the worst program in major college football from a historical standpoint. It had barely done anything over time. But Duke at least had the 30s and 40s and 50s.
Yeah,
okay?
but
Wake had Brian Song.
Team that avoided the winless season.
Wake had Brian Song. Okay, Wake didn't have much else. Okay, P had Walker 75 years ago. There wasn't much there. But Jim Grove was a phenomenal hire and did a great job. Took him to the Orange Bowl, and then what usually you would think when a guy like that leaves a place like that, how can they ever find another dude? Like, how's Duke going to find someone that makes it competitive like Cutcliffe has when Cutcliffe eventually leaves? Well, Wake did it with Clawson, and I think it's a phenomenal story. And Dave Clawson, I think, would win wherever he goes. But you were saying last week where you think this might be a place he stays because it fits him so well.
Yep. And, listen, he's not going to win the press conference if he goes someplace like Michigan or someplace, that really has a football first kind of attitude. And he just doesn't have that personality that's going to win over the fan base, even though he would be successful there. So I don't think he gets, he gets the looks that other coaches would get because of that. And by the way, keep this in mind about this year's Wake team. They're 4-4, but they had games against both Duke and Florida State canceled. So There's a good chance they'd be 6-4 right now if they were able to play those games.
Yeah, that's one reason why I mentioned when you watch them play. When you watch them play at 4-4, they're a solid team. I think that I saw them against Carolina, and they would not go away. They had a nice lead. Carolina exploded. A lot of teams would wilt in that situation. Wake didn't because of the culture. That culture is really amazingly strong foundation in that program.
Speaking of coaches, let's take a quick look at the three coaches. You mentioned the Wake Forest coach, Dave. It seems like he may have a fit here at Wake, like Cutcliffe does at Duke. How about Manny at Miami and Dave Doran at NC State? What do you see? What's your take on how they did this year? And are they long-term coaches with the teams they are with, or are they going to succeed? Are they going to move up, stay where they are, or get kicked out?
Well, Doran should have been the ACC Coach of the Year. I mean, Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, yeah, they went undefeated during the regular season, but I mean, give me Ian Book and those, they had 4 first-team All-ACC offensive linemen. Give me that to start with, and I'm going to win a lot of games. And so if you look at Doran coming off a year where they were 4-8, they lost their last 6 games. Their starting quarterback has a season-ending injury. I think that he did a phenomenal job. And it started at the end of last year when he cleaned house with his assistants. He brought in Tim Beck to run the offense. He got new voices, and he let them do their job. And that's what a good head coach does. And, listen, with a new athletic director there, Dave Doran needed this kind of season. So I think he's off the hot seat. Having said that, if I were Dave Doran, even though you've got a good recruiting class coming in, you've got most of your key elements coming back from this season, if something really intriguing opened up, he's a Midwestern guy, say Nebraska or someplace like that, now might not be a bad time to cash in your chips and to start the clock over with somebody else. Just because, as Tom O'Brien once said, coaches, most of the time, unless you're like a Mike Krzyzewski or a Bobby Bowden, your shelf life is 8 to 10 years, and Doran's been there for 8 years. I think he has a long-term future at NC State, but just in case, keep an eye on to see what he does, because you don't want to overstay your welcome. As far as Manny Diaz, first couple of years, listen, they had to. Andrew talked about culture, and they had to change culture at Miami because they keep talking about this whole swagger thing, and that's something that's been gone for 2 decades. You just can't recreate that. You got to create something new, something your own. And I think that Diaz in time should do that. And bringing in De'Aaron King has definitely helped speed up the process. But I think that he's not a bad fit at Miami. I think he's been there before as an assistant. He's from that area. I think that's a good fit. But I think that it's something that takes time. And now they're in year 2. So let's see how that progresses next year.
I think Doran would have been a worthy ACC Coach of the Year winner. I would have given a slight edge to Kelly for a couple of reasons. It's hard for any of us to really understand the weight of coaching that program, of sitting in that office and knowing all the amazing, great coaches that have been there and the standard that is there. Notre Dame hasn't won a national title since '88, but the standard is still there. The pressure is still there. And Brian Kelly has survived at Notre Dame, a place that other guys have said after they've left that it just drains you, takes everything out of you. And he's thriving now 10, 11 years in or however long it is. And he had to go into a league where they knew nothing about anybody. I know they play ACC teams some every year, but this was a different animal. And this was something he had to embrace with his team, and they had to go out. Every time I saw an interview with him, he kept talking about the importance of the ACC. So he sold it. And by the way, when you have Ian Book and when you have some of the studs that they have, who's responsible for bringing them in? Who's responsible for coaching them up? He's winless. They're still there.
He's winless in conference championship games. Rockney never lost a championship game. Lou Holtz never lost a conference championship game. None of them, right? So Eric Parsegian never lost a championship, right? So he's got that. He's got that blemish on his record.
Yeah, well, that's a Friedlanderism if there ever was one. As far as Manny Diaz goes, you're right about the culture. It looks like they're trying to force culture, like to force that swag stuff. And I can't stand it. When stuff has to be forced, it's because it's not there. And then it's not worth the effort. It takes too much effort to try to make something that isn't there. Miami has to become Manny Diaz's personality, and I think it will over time. And what is that? It's South Florida. It is what makes that area tick, and it's not going to reject some of the things that people enjoy down there. I've covered quite a few games down there, and it's a different place, man. I mean, some of us joked a couple of years ago. I was there for a Thursday night game and now Miami was rolling it up on the Tar Heels, right? And it was it's not on campus, so they always sold beer there. So everyone's got at least one hand with a drink in hand, and they're playing all this music after a touchdown. And someone joked in the press box saying there should be bubbles falling from the top of Hard Rock Stadium. It's just a different place, and he's not going to reject that. And I think it's okay to embrace that. But there has to be something else. The same stuff that they wanted from Mark Richt, I think they can get from Manny Diaz, but also have the bells and whistles. Over time, I think that'll happen. I think you made a great point about De'Aaron King. Getting him to come was big. You got to have a good quarterback to win. They've got a good quarterback. They know they're going to be good next year, and it gives him time to go out and find a lot of dudes that see Miami as a viable place to go again and see that thing point in the right direction. And in spite of what happened a couple weeks ago when Carolina was in town, that program is certainly headed in the right direction.
And the dumpster
and I think he'll be there for a while.
The dumpster fire that is Florida State will help their recruiting too, because a lot of those kids from South Florida are going to stay home now rather than going to Tallahassee and play, for Mike Norvell, who number one had a terrible season, and number two, even before the year began, his players were going on social media complaining about how he really didn't care about them or he was lying to them, and that's not a good way to start your program.
I never thought I'd ever say this, but FSU needs to just tear it down and start over again. I don't know if Norvell's going to get it done. The stuff that happened in May and June and July was concerning, and it's very difficult to overcome. And now that the season's over, and when the kids come back in January and they start doing their off-season training and stuff, does some of that stuff resurface? If it does, it's going to be a short lifespan for him in Tallahassee, and they're going to have to start from scratch wherever they go.
Yeah, I've got that on the list before we move on to some more of the bowl stuff. Why don't we go ahead and talk about that? What's up with FSU, the cancellations? They were one of the teams that didn't seem to handle the COVID situation well. Do you guys want to start off on just your impressions of what's going on at FSU?
Yeah, I'll go first on this. I think that when you go back to the whole Clemson thing, I'm not going to side with either one there because I don't. There are particulars involved that I don't know, and the reasoning behind some of it we can always speculate. But the thing that kind of concerned me about it was if you read the FSU, the media that covers FSU, if you read what their fans were saying on social media and otherwise, which I did for a while, just trying to figure out if there was something else, right? They kept propping up saying, well, it was Clemson's fault for bringing an infected player down to Tallahassee, and we've been doing it right. We haven't had any positive tests and anything like that. And from that point on, they were a mess with COVID. I mean, they came off as if they weren't even dealing with it at all. That's not the case. They were obviously dealing with it, but it was a mess, and that was a hit, and that was a PR disaster, in my opinion, from FSU. They could not have handled it worse. And again, that goes back to what I just said a minute ago. There's a lot of stuff for that program, that school to sort through now that the season is over. I don't know what else they're going to find. That's why I keep thinking that, maybe Norvell could go somewhere else and be a successful coach because a lot of people in the business think he could be a great coach someday. Maybe this is just not the right place and the wrong time. Someone else needs to come in that can clean that thing up, give it life, give it DNA. I talk about culture at Wake Forest. NC State has a culture with Doran. They need to give it culture and go from there. If you don't have culture, if everybody's not bought in, it's not going to move forward. And that's kind of where FSU is right now.
The thing about the Clemson situation is it got more credence the following week when they did the same thing to Virginia. And I just don't think Florida State wanted to play. I don't think they had any interest in playing at all. And you see the Wake Forest game got called off too. I think this whole situation, the decline of the Seminoles, goes all the way back to when Jimbo Fisher was there. He knew he was leaving. He didn't want to stay. He had some marital problems. He knew he was going, and he stopped recruiting. And so for the last 2 years he was there, you could see it start to get shaky. And then they made an absolutely awful hire. They had in mind who they wanted. They just didn't go out and do a whole lot of due diligence. And that didn't turn out well. And then the whole Norvell situation, he didn't help things out any this summer. Like I said, he had a couple of instances where his players, I think at one point, they decided they were going to boycott practice because they felt like he lied to them about, the protocols for COVID and situation. It's just like you said, a mess.
Well, yeah, I think
they're going to have to hit the reset button, whether that means ride this out and get another coach or basically wait till Norvell gets his entire, roster of guys that he recruited in, so that, that they believe in him and they've bought into him. I don't know what it is, but I don't think this is a situation that's going to turn around overnight. I don't think Florida State is going to be viable again for at least a couple of seasons. And that's got to be really, really concerning to the folks down there, because I know there's a lot of money they put into that program, and they take it very seriously. And I'm sure there are a lot of donors that are not going to be happy. And it's stunning, to be honest with you. And, we saw it with UNC basketball when they made a bad hire. We saw it with Duke basketball when Krzyzewski sat out for a year. You take it for granted that programs are going to be great. Like Pete Gillen once said, Duke is Duke. But if you make a bad hire and you have a couple of bad recruiting classes in a row, then things can go south in a real hurry, and it doesn't come back overnight.
Indiana basketball is another example. They haven't recovered that much from Mike Davis. They're still trying to. There's a lot of examples out there that are like that. And I agree with you about Florida State's going to take a while. I think the Jimbo thing is something that's not talked about enough, but it goes back to the whole flirtation with LSU. When you start sticking your foot out the door and you're the heir apparent to Bobby Bowden and it's working, it's one of the few examples we've seen where a guy replaced a legend and actually was succeeding, but he had a foot kind of dangling out the door and he had some of the other stuff that was going on. All ADs tell you they've got that list of 5 names in their drawer just in case. You've got to wonder if there was even a list in Tallahassee. Because when the time came, it was as if they didn't really know what they were doing. And the precedent has been set. Getting rid of Willie Taggart during these times in his second year, Norvell has to go into next year not on a hot seat, but on a blazing hot seat. If they're 1-5 and they're getting steamrolled, the precedent has been set. They're going to have to make a change for a lot of reasons. You guys understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And, hey, that's the reason Willie Taggart got hired in the first place after 1 year at Oregon. He was in way over his head.
But a lot of people thought that he was an up-and-comer. When he was at Western Kentucky, I believe it was Western Kentucky.
Florida, wasn't it? USF?
But he was at several places where he was building his name. And a lot of people thought, this guy's a genius. He's going to be the next wave of the great head coaches in college football. And he was in over his head. Because going back to what I was saying about Notre Dame, it's not just coaching football. There's a whole other monster you have to deal with. Florida State has it to a smaller degree, but maybe to a more intense degree in some ways. Notre Dame's bigger, but maybe when you're not doing well at Florida State, maybe the natives in there, the FSU fans, are a lot more intense with their disapproval.
You want to add something to that, or are you ready to move on to the next topic?
I'm ready to move on to the next one. Yeah.
All right. Hey, let's talk about that Orange Bowl, the UNC versus Texas A&M game. That's 8 p.m. Eastern time. I think, as Brett mentioned, there's a couple players that are opted out. Some fans seem to be disappointed about it. Other folks are going like, hey, you know what? Mac Brown's getting, $300K for getting them to the Orange Bowl, and what are the players getting besides some tchotchkes from the bowl committees? What's your sense on I don't have the line on who's the favorite on that one, but let's have Brett start this time. What's your feeling about the game and just players opting out and stuff like that?
Well, I think, first of all, let's go with the opting out. I don't blame these kids at all, okay? Because you tear an ACL in this game. Say Chaz Surratt tears his ACL. No, make it Michael Carter, because, running backs are devalued anyway, especially in the draft. And he could go from a second-round pick to a fifth-round pick in a heartbeat, and that's a lot of money. And and in the NFL, contracts aren't guaranteed like they are in the NBA. So I don't blame these kids one iota, especially since this game is basically just an exhibition game. It really is just a made-for-TV matchup. It's not like it's the playoffs. So there's that. But as far as the game itself is concerned, given the guys who are going to play, I think everything depends on how Texas A&M approaches this game. If Texas A&M approaches this game with a chip on its shoulder because it thinks it should be in the playoff and brings its A game and wants to make a statement, I think Carolina's in a lot of trouble. If Florida State just kind of shows up and says, you know what, we don't really want to be here, this is just garbage, and then I think Carolina's got a chance to really, to do a Miami on them. Another factor is who plays. I mean, listen, you talk about opt-outs, but who tests positive? I mean, who and how many guys are available for these teams, I think will play a really big role into, how this game unfolds. But I think this is more about Texas A&M than Carolina, because I think you're going to get from Carolina what you're going to get from Carolina.
So you think the winner is going to be who?
Texas A&M, but that is if Texas A&M shows up. If Texas A&M just goes through the motions, then Carolina wins it.
All right.
As far as opt-outs go, I'm kind of with Brett on this one. I wasn't a few years ago, but thankfully I continue to evolve as a person, and life kind of forces that to happen. I can totally understand why these kids would do that. And one of the things that I think is an interesting comparison is a lot of the fans on our site, they're not happy with Carter, Brown, and Chaz for opting out. A lot of people say, oh, they're bailing on their team, that kind of thing. But they're thrilled about the 12 signees that are going to enroll early in January, 10 of whom their schools have spring seasons still to play. Another one had to weigh whether or not he wanted to finish the basketball season with his high school team. And he announced 2 nights ago that he's going to go ahead and enroll early. He's leaving his basketball team. They don't view that as quitting on their teammates, as bailing on their teammates, but they do when a couple of players that are at Carolina decide to make similar decisions for themselves. I don't think these kids, when you get to a bowl game when there's no championship at stake, I don't think they owe anybody anything anymore. They have done their part. Chaz Surratt, think about what he's endured in his career. When in 2017, his redshirt freshman year, he was a pretty good quarterback for a few games until he started getting beaten senseless. And that team fell apart and had all those injuries. And then there were some other things that happened that complicated matters about him playing injured and everything else. And then the year later, everybody remembers that night at Miami. But, that was just a perfect storm for a disaster to occur. A lot of personal things were going on around that time that affected him as well. And that's what people remember. He overcame that. I remember when we broke the story that he was switching to linebacker, people laughed. They told us we were idiots for reporting something like that, for believing it. Of course, we knew it was true. We had dynamic sources on that. And he turned into an All-ACC linebacker. He's going to be a very high draft pick. He's going to play in the league for a long time. He's going to wow everybody at the combine. He's going to make a ton of cash, just like his brother Will, who's a sensational prospect as well. I think Chaz has given this school plenty. He's given his fan base plenty. It's time for him to worry about himself. And I'm not a big fan of this expression because it's very selfish sounding, but I'm going to use it anyway because I do think it's fair and applies. It's time to get his. Michael Carter scored 2 touchdowns in his first game as a true freshman against Carolina. By the way, option pitches from Chaz Surratt. He's given his body for the school, 3,400 yards. He's the 4th all-time leading rusher. It's time to get his. Dami Brown is the only 2-time 1,000-yard receiver in Carolina history. He has been an amazing compliment to Sam Howell. It's time to get his. I have no problem with it. And I actually think it's not a terrible thing for UNC because if you want to be a championship contender, and that's the way they say, that's what their stated mission is, you've got to be more than just 3 guys. You've got to have dudes behind them that are ready to step in and play. Clemson, Bama, Ohio State, they lose guys all the time. They replace them, and they're still really good. The only reason I bring those schools up because Mac Brown has said multiple times, we want to be Clemson. We want to be like that. Okay, well, what you got? The guys that are going to play in place of them have an opportunity to practice as starters for a couple of weeks and then get 60, 70 snaps against the number 5 team in America, a club from the SEC. They get a jump start on next year, which is a season in which this program believes it can contend for the CFP. They're going to be better positioned to do that with the extra time some of these kids are going to get now in the Orange Bowl and the practice time leading up to it than if the Brown, Carter, and Surratt didn't opt out and played in this game. This is actually a good thing long-term for UNC, in my opinion, and it's perfectly fine for those kids because they're all going to get drafted and they're all going to go on and make money for for themselves, and Carolina gets to hang their pictures up on the wall of the Keenan Football Center for recruits to see. That's going to have a lot longer impact, more of an impact on the program than them playing in this one exhibition game.
And oh, by the way, Javonte Williams is a pretty fair little running back, and Daz Newsome, and Bo Corrales, they got some pretty good hands. So I think that the cupboard's not bare for this game.
Yeah, the offensive line's there. The secondary's coming along. There's a lot of talent in the program. They're getting more. Carolina football's going this way, guys. And this is a great opportunity and a great challenge. And I actually think they're going to handle it pretty well. As a guy who covers the team, and I spend every day of my life writing about Carolina football and basketball and recruiting and everything else, I'm excited to see what Eugene Asante can do at linebacker alongside Jeremiah Gemmel. And you know who else is excited? Jeremiah Gemmel. He cannot wait to see Eugene Asante out there with him on the field. And Asante is going to go into the offseason as the starter, knowing what it's like to prepare as a starter and get all those reps against a bunch of monsters from Texas A&M. It's only going to make him better. Regardless of how he plays January 2nd, it's going to make him better, and that's going to make Carolina better for the 21 season.
So who are you picking to win this game?
Oh, I'm picking Texas A&M. Look, this has been a phenomenal close to the season for Carolina, but I've had a lot of people say, boy, they don't even matter that they lost to FSU and lost to Virginia. Well, Mac will tell you, they lost those games because they were supposed to lose those games. That was part of their process. They are still in a process right now, becoming whatever it is they're going to become down the road. And you have to have the speed bumps. You have to clank into stuff every once in a while to fully figure it out. And part of their clanking was Tallahassee. Another part was Charlottesville. Another part was what happened for much of the Wake Forest game. But it was also Notre Dame when they gained a little confidence that they could go toe-to-toe with a club that historically, a game like that, Carolina would have been steamrolled. And because of those experiences, they were much more ready to go to Miami and take care of business there. Now this is the next step. How do they handle a stage like this? It's going to be really interesting to see. If they lose, they're still going to benefit from it. This program under Mac Brown has proven that when negative stuff happens on the field, they quickly learn from it and they get better from it. So they're going to win either way. They're going to be better for the experience, but I don't think they're ready to win a game like this, even if they have Brown, Carter, and Surratt.
All right, so we got you two going with Texas A&M. Let's move on to the CFP. There's 1+1. There's 2 ACC teams in there. First game is the Orange Bowl. We did that. It's Notre Dame versus Alabama, 5 p.m. game. Alabama is actually a 19-point favorite around there against Notre Dame. Brett, what's your feelings about this game?
You might as well just play the Alabama-Clemson game because that's what's coming to. I mean, listen, and the other 2 teams in this playoff, everybody has been going crazy about who should and shouldn't be in. They're the Washington Generals. It's going to be Alabama and Clemson.
I love that. You said that. You used that example before, and it's a great one. And I agree with you. All the positives I said about Notre Dame, it's going to be a boat race. They're going to get clobbered. And they're not going to get clobbered because of anything disrespectful toward Notre Dame. Alabama's just that good. Alabama's defense had 2 tough games. So what did the offense do? Let's score in the 50s and 60s. Win the game. Alabama will do whatever they have to do to win. It's going to be Alabama, and Clemson will too, especially now that Clemson's worked through everything. They kind of get their little mojo going. And I think it helps Clemson that there's not a lot of time in between the ACC Championship and the Ohio State game. They're better off kind of getting back into it a couple weeks later. And, Ohio State, I guess they deserve to be there if the whole point is getting the top 4 teams. But I do think that there is a difference between Alabama, Clemson, and then everybody else. And we're going to see it in the semifinals. Clemson will win by a couple touchdowns. Alabama's going to win by 3 or 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, we're not going to get into whether Ohio State belongs there. That's a non-ACC topic. We're going to keep this ACC, but we can jump to.
Why I skirted over it.
We can climb into Clemson versus Ohio State. Actually, Clemson right now 7-point favorite. That game's supposed to start at 8:45 after the Rose Bowl in Arlington, Texas. Now we all know that the Rose Bowl has been played outside of California at some other ACC school. We'll let the folks Google it and figure out where that happened. But Brett, what's your feelings on that Clemson Ohio State game, and then the final. I know you already said it's Alabama versus Clemson, but how about Clemson against Ohio State?
I think Trevor Lawrence is going to put on a show, and I think they're going to put up a huge number. And defensively, they're just – when everybody's there, they are so good, and they are so aggressive. And just look at the duress they put Fields under last year during the playoff. I just think – and I think this is probably a better Clemson team. I just don't see this being much of a matchup at all. And by the way, you don't see anybody for any of these four teams opting out, do you? And the reason is because now there's something to play for these four teams. You know, the rest of the bowls basically are just product for ESPN. They're really inconsequential. But these games do mean something. There's a championship on the line here, and all the players. I mean, because Trevor Lawrence is going to be the first player on the taken in the draft. You know, he could very easily said, you know, I've had enough. I'm going to go prepare for the draft. But they're not doing that because these games mean something.
Ohio State's played 6 games, and the two best teams they played are Indiana and Northwestern. Indiana's actually pretty good, but it's not Clemson. I mean, you know, Fields struggled.
They haven't seen the speed that they're going to see from Clemson.
They needed a 331-yard rushing game to take care of Northwestern, and I just think that Clemson is going to just swallow them whole. Clemson isn't going to beat them by as much as Bama will beat Notre Dame because I think Ohio State's better than Notre Dame. They have more athletes that can handle some of that speed stuff. But I don't think either game is going to be very competitive. Maybe Clemson pulls away a little bit later. Maybe Ohio State hangs around a little bit. And, of course, you know, last year Ohio State got off to that lead and Clemson just kind of fought back. They found themselves. But I agree with Brett. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be amazing. I don't know if he's going to win the Heisman or not. He may end up being Peyton Manning, or he doesn't win the Heisman but goes on and has just a ridiculous career. But I think sometimes I know that you didn't ask about the Heisman, but sometimes you should take into consideration what a guy has done during the course of his career. And that's why if I had a Heisman vote, I would vote for Trevor. And plus, he's just been awesome when he's been on the field this year.
One of the reasons I think Trevor Lawrence is going to win the Heisman is because Alabama's got multiple candidates.
Yeah, that's true.
That's going to split the vote. I think Lawrence is going to win. I think he deserves it.
And I think last weekend, if he does, last weekend pushed him over the top, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on that because Trevor was again the ACC Player of the Year, quarterback of the first team, and then you've got a discussion that comes up about you know who's up there for the Heisman, and I would think he's one of the top choices, but it sounds like you folks are like, yes, we vote for him, but we could see why he wouldn't get it, and it really doesn't matter because he's going to be the first round draft pick. So yeah, there we go. Anything else to add on that?
He's as much of an it guy as I've seen in college in a long time. Maybe
Plus,
since
he's got
Peyton.
great looking hair.
My favorite thing is this nickname. They call him the Giraffe because when he starts running, he's really tall and he's got long legs and a long torso, and he looks like a giraffe when he's out there running. You know,
he's a bit of an upright runner. He's a bit of an upright runner, and he's tall and long and all that stuff. And then you got the hair flapping, and he's unmistakable.
Yep.
I remember seeing him play against NC State down at Clemson, and he was a freshman. I'm like, yeah, I've seen freshmen be, talked up again, but I was impressed with his speed. How about the 3 teams that are ACC teams that opted out of bowls? We got Virginia, Boston College, Pitt. Any thoughts about that?
Same as the 3 guys for Carolina that opted out. You're playing in games that really does you no good to play. There's really no positives other than to get 15 extra practices and get on TV and everything. But these games, especially now with all the hoops that you have to jump through for travel, it's going to cost teams to go, and you're not getting the full bowl experience. And usually in regular circumstances, you go a week before the game. Like, I'll give you the example, the Duke's Mayo Bowl, the game in Charlotte. They take them to the racetrack, and they do a ride-along. They take them to the kids' hospital. They let them go to Belk store and do a shopping spree. You get all these things, but now you're going to go the day before a game. You're going to play. You're going to come right home. It's going to be like a regular road game. What's the point? I don't have any problem with teams opting out.
I think there are too many bowls anyway. I'm a big fan of going back to about 18. When I kind of chuckle sometimes when coaches of 6 and 6 teams talk about the reward. And we were talking about Kentucky earlier, 4-6. I mean, if you're beating Murray State, Morehead State, and Indiana State, you're on conference schedule, and you get to 6-6. How is that a reward? However, I think the reward element to try to understand that is the kids have put in a lot. I mean, these guys work 48 weeks out of the year in their sport. A lot of folks don't really know what goes into the off season, but it is intense, and all those volunteer workouts, they're keep track of that stuff. It's not really volunteer. So the reward is they get a chance to go somewhere, relax, play a game that you want to win. Some teams are more into it than others, but the reward is the experience. Nobody is having the experience this year. I think Carolina's going down the 2 days before, Max said, and there's going to be nothing to do. They just go down, practice, get a little acclimated again to just being down there, and you don't want to have to get up the next day and play Texas A&M, after being one night in a hotel. So you spend 2 nights in a hotel, whatever. I think as far as the schools that opted out, they've been through a tough year. It's been a long year. These kids started reporting in June. Usually they have their OTA stuff, and then they go home for a while, then they report at the end of July. They reported in June, and they've been in a bubble in a sense. They have not been able to do much. They've had no social life whatsoever. Their academics have been online, and their interaction has been just together, which is one of the things that Coach K talked about some of the reasons why he decided let's let his guys go home for a while. They got to be human beings. And so I think in those cases of Pitt, BC, and Virginia, they've had enough. They don't need the extra practices because they played into the middle of December anyway, so they already had a ton of practices. These guys are preparing for games, spending weeks preparing for games that get pulled out at the last minute, canceled or postponed at the last minute. So they've done enough. I think the reward and the celebration should be that they finished the season. The ACC did an amazing job finishing the season. The league should be commended for it. Everybody involved, the coaches, the staff, the players, they should all be commended for finishing the season. And you know what their reward is? Go home, be with your family. Go home, have Christmas.
I agree 100%. I think the decision to play or not play depends on your situation. I think it changes with different schools. If you're NC State, you definitely want to play another game and give yourself an exclamation point and, like you said, a reward for a really good season. If you're Wake Forest, you want to get another game because you've been working so long and you only got 8 games and you haven't played, like I said, but once since Halloween. But if you're a Boston College or a Virginia and you've played it out and you've got injuries and you haven't really had that greatest season and they're going to send you to Shreveport or wherever,
exactly.
So I think it all depends on who you are and where you're going, and you make your own decision.
And if we would have been asked this question a couple of weeks ago, okay, 3 ACC teams are going to opt out of bowl games that are having decent years, that are at least bowl worthy in 2020. Who might it be? Brett, I bet you we would have come up with the 3 that opted out.
Probably.
Well, I guess Virginia Tech as well, I guess said they were going to, but I don't remember. They had a losing record, so whatever.
Yeah, if I'm Fuente, I don't want to add any more.
I never.
At the end of the hour here, if you
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, I froze up. We're getting close to we're at the hour. If you want, we can end it here because we've got lots of good information. Or there's a couple other things I want to talk about. Coaches on the hot seat, ACC as a league handling how they handle the COVID situation, which ACC teams handled it best and worst. Maybe touch on the new ACC commissioner, and then the 3 of us individually have talked about just this being a weird season from somebody who covers the sport. So you want to go another 10, 15 minutes, or do you want to wrap it up?
Well, we could do a lightning round where we just kind of give our scattershot thoughts about all those subjects and then kind of talk about your last thing at the end. But
it's December 23rd, and I have to do a little bit of shopping. I'll stick around, but I don't want to do another hour.
We'll
I don't
do
want
this
to look at Brett for another hour. I don't want to look at him for another hour.
Look, no.
I don't want to look at you for another hour, Gene. You guys don't want to look at me. Hey, by the way, you like this? AJ is in.
You look cool. Okay, we'll do a lightning round. ACC coaches on the hot seat. We mentioned FSU already. I got Justin over Fuentes over at Syracuse, Jeff down at Georgia Tech, David, not Dave, Cutcliffe at Duke, and then Scott down in Louisville. Lightning round. Start Brett.
Scott and Collins have been there only 1 or 2 seasons, so I think they're safe. Especially Collins, who had to just totally rebuild that entire program from scratch. As far as Fuente is concerned, they passed the hat around, couldn't come up with enough money to buy him out. So I think he starts next season on the hot seat. I would not be shocked if Dave Cutcliffe retires. I don't think he's going to get fired because he's done too much for that program. To be honest with you, I think everybody who's currently a coach in the ACC is back next year.
So clarify your Cutcliffe thing. We chatted about this a little bit last week. What is your timeline for that?
I think he's going to retire. I don't, whether it's this year or after next year. I just don't feel like he had his heart in it this year. It just didn't seem like it. Maybe it's because of the unique circumstances, but I don't think he's getting fired. I don't think Kevin White fires him because Kevin White, there's a different culture. We've used that a lot of times today at Duke, and I think that he's done way too much for that program to get cast aside.
I'm surprised Baber still has his job because it looked like that thing just kind of derailed and it reached a point where it was irreparable, especially with a new AD there. Maybe the AD is going to cut up some slack because of the challenges with COVID, and I think that's happening to some coaches.
And also, they might not be able to afford his buyout either.
They may not be able to afford his buyout. I mean, they just spent a crap load of money renovating the Carrier Dome, which I can't wait to go up there again because every time I've gone up there before, I've almost got injured trying to go in and out because of the suction of that place because it was the dome was an air thing. It was just bizarre. Hated it. Anyway,
next one on the lightning round.
Real fast. Let me finish that just real fast.
All right.
Fuente and the money. I'm surprised that Virginia Tech doesn't have the money to buy him out. That's something that's not working. And Hendon Hooker entering the transfer portal, that's something that's definitely not working. Their recruiting has fallen off a cliff. I'm just surprised that they're sticking with that. It just kind of makes you wonder what Virginia Tech football is going to be like moving forward without Frank Beamer. And the further it gets away from Beamer, it loses whatever luster it once had. That lunch pail means less now than it did 5 years ago.
All right. How did the ACC as a league handle the COVID situation? I know at the beginning of the season there was a question, is there going to even be a season? Some of the conferences says, no, we're not going to do anything. The conferences are saying, hey, we're going to wait till the springtime. And then the ACC basically seemed to have taken the ball and said, we're going to make this work. We know there's going to be bumps. We're going to make adjustments. And did they make it work? What were the pros and cons? What were the best and worst of how the ACC as a league handled the COVID situation?
I went first last time. AJ, go ahead.
Well, I think I would ask the people in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 how they think the ACC handled it. I bet you every one of them would say, damn well. Really good job. Outstanding, Mr. Swafford. And you now deserve to walk away a little bit sooner because you got the league to the finish line, highest percentage of games played. You had a championship game that everybody cared about and watched. ACC football mattered a lot in November and mattered a lot in December. And now you got two, whether they're a one-year club or not, they're still in the league. You got two teams in the playoff. I think it was an outstanding year for the ACC. And one of its bigger games didn't involve Notre Dame or Clemson. That Miami-Carolina game was a big deal. Herb Street and Fowler were there, and Carolina's performance generated a ton of national attention for the league, and it had nothing to do with Trevor Lawrence, Ian Book, and their teammates. So I think a great year for the ACC, all things considered, and even with the FSU issues. So A+ for John Swafford and the ACC.
I agree 100%. And I can tell you this, the benefit for the ACC is going to be beyond this year. The ACC helped its brand and its future immensely because of the respect that it and the attention that it drew this year. And you can say what you want about John Swafford, but John Swafford's legacy will be forever. He's the man who saved college football in 2020. Because if he would have gone along with the crowd, because the Big Ten and the Pac-12 pulled the plug way too early. Swaff said, well, we'll just wait on this. Let's just see what happens. And he figured out how to get this thing done. He convinced his presidents to do it. The SEC followed suit. And then the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, they scrambled to get on board too. Without John Swafford and without the ACC, there would have been no college football this season. And
let me add to that real quickly. By jumping out front, and now the Big 12 made the similar decision around the same time, but the ACC, Swafford's leading the way. He was kind of out front more so. He said, we care about football. Football matters here. We're having a football season in the ACC. The Big Ten, with all of its history and tradition and Chicago U way back in 1908 and all that kind of stuff, they're not going to play. We are. You guys think we're a basketball conference? No, we're playing football this year. And I think that's part of changing the image of the ACC, and I think it worked.
Actually, that worked out. I would agree with both your assessments. And I think you briefly mentioned the FSU kind of falling apart with the whole thing. But of all the ACC teams, which teams did you think handled it? Individual teams handled it, the COVID situation best, and which handled it worse? I'm
going to say NC State because, and maybe it's because I was closer to the program and I covered most of their games, but they had an outbreak just before the start of the regular season. They got their first game, was supposed to be at Virginia Tech. They got it postponed and moved a couple weeks later. But once they started playing, they played 11 games without an interruption and with most of their players able to play. Dave Doran and his staff did an amazing job of keeping those guys isolated, keeping them out of harm's way, and they got, like you said, they were rewarded with an 8-win season. I thought they did the best job. As far as the worst job, hands down, it's Florida State.
Yeah, I agree with you on both. I think along with NC State, the school that they hate the most did an excellent job. Carolina had a lot of positive tests in July throughout the athletic department. And they learned from it. And there have been football program has not reported any positives since. And the two games that were shifted, Charlotte canceled nearly the last minute, and Carolina found a replacement, and they had to move the Miami and Western Carolina games around because of other schools, because of other scheduling. So Carolina and NC State did a really good job. Kudos to both schools for completing their seasons and not being responsible for any schedule issues.
Okay.
And yeah, FSU, absolutely.
All right. So FSU and both State and Carolina did well. Getting down to the last two items here on the lightning round. Brett had mentioned John Swofford. And again, we could do a whole show on this. Assessment of John Swofford as ACC commissioner and thoughts on Jim Phillips coming in as the new commissioner after John retires this year. Brett?
I don't think the people at NC State and Clemson are going to like this, but John Swofford presided over the ACC over an incredibly tumultuous time. He saved the ACC by firing a preemptive shot and raiding the Big East before the Big East could raid the ACC. He got them to sign the grant of rights that kept the league together when everybody else was poaching teams. You listen. There's a lot of things you can gig him on. But he had the ACC, his best interest in mind, and the ACC is a much stronger league, and it is still a viable league because of John Swofford. I don't know enough about Jim Phillips to make a judgment about him, but I can tell you that everything I've heard, all the comments from all the people who have worked with him, and there are a lot of them in the ACC, say that this is a guy who's got his act together. He's a young guy. He's got great ties. Throughout college sports. We'll have to see, but he's got a big job ahead of him because he's got some big shoes to fill.
John Swofford speaks softly, and upon being in his presence, you might not think this guy is an ass kicker, but he really is. It's interesting that Matt Brown was asked a question the other day about. I asked him one as well, but he was asked a question the other day about. His last two Carolina teams were top 10 teams, but they didn't get to play in the Orange Bowl. The scenarios, the way things were structured then made it really challenging for anybody other than the ACC champion to play in a big bowl game back then. Now look at it. They're 8-3 with losses to Florida State and Virginia, and they're going to the Orange Bowl. That happened because John Swofford's leadership. John Swofford just became the commissioner back in '97, and look how far the league has come. Look at the way it's changed. And it's changed for the better. Because anybody that's honest with themselves would have to agree that the Holly Farm sail with the pilot ACC could not survive in today's landscape. It was great when it happened. Thacker and Packer was phenomenal, but it had to change to survive. And I agree with you 100%, Brett. You pointed out all the reasons why John Swofford's done an amazing job. He gets a beating from some people, but you know what? Every school in this league that was in the league in the 80s and 90s is healthier now because of John Swofford. As for Jim Phillips, his peers voted him. I don't know what the AD award is. I can't remember what the name of it is. A couple of years ago, he was named the top AD in the country. You don't get that at Northwestern unless you're doing something right, and unless people have immense respect for you. Because it's not like Northwestern is popping out there in front of people all the time. But under his watch, Northwestern basketball went to an NCAA tournament, and Northwestern football, he's kept Pat Fitzgerald. They've been competitive most of the time, pretty good some years, and their other sports have been pretty solid. And he has the connections that he does in the past. I think it's, based on what I know, pretty good hire. Time will tell, but he's got big shoes to fill. John Swofford's done an incredible job.
Well, the thing we can definitely take away from that, based on what Andrew Jones says, is John Swofford is a big-time ass kicker. Anyway,
My bad.
Wrapping this up with our own personal weird experience. Again, these are the guys who are the sports writers. I'm just a photographer. I miss being out there on the sidelines taking the pictures. I love listening to these guys talk in the press box, because a lot of the information that they talk to make me a better photographer, because I know what to watch for after I talk with them. But Brett, what's your feelings weirdness wise about 2020? And then we'll finish up with Andrew. And then I want you guys to give us plugs as to your Twitter accounts and where folks can follow you to get more information, not just on the teams you concentrate on, but on the ACC. Brett, go.
The weirdness is having them point that little thermometer at your forehead and take your temperature before you get to go into a press box. And trying to teach an old dog new tricks like me how to use Zoom. That was a lot of fun. The thing I miss the most is the interaction. I don't get to see. AJ, when was the last time we've seen each other in person?
Maybe once. We did one football game. Was it NC State game?
Probably.
NC State, Carolina?
It's crazy. I miss seeing you guys. I miss the banter before games. I miss the interaction. I miss actually being able to talk one-on-one with players, because now you can't do it. Now you can't do a story in which you're getting an exclusive and you're asking specific questions, because you got to do it in a Zoom with everybody else, piggybacking on. I'll be glad when this is all over with and we can get back to some semblance of normal. And you don't have to do this and look like you're getting ready to rob the place when you go to a game.
I'll tell you, the other day I was in Cleveland for the CBS Sports Classic, and
I guess one night, huh?
Yeah, boy, it was so windy and cold and nasty. It's kind of a cool place, but I'm walking around the same time thinking, why would anybody live here? Why would somebody choose to anchor down here? Anyway, different topic for a different day. So I'm in Cleveland for the CBS Sports Classic, and the only cool thing that's happened as a fallout from COVID from a professional perspective was during the Carolina-Kentucky game. The only people in the building, it's a 20,000-seat building where the Cavaliers play, okay? You've got team personnel, coaches, trainers, that kind of thing. There's game essential people, statisticians, CBS people, and like 10 members of the media credentialed, and then there's like 15 security people in the building. That was it. And there was no fake crowd noise. And I'm hearing Lance Ware gets taken out of the game after picking up a foul for Kentucky, and Calipari just lights into him. And I thought to myself, I've always wanted to go to a secret scrimmage, those things they have in October. Now I'm at one. The entire season is as much as secret scrimmages. It's crazy. So that's the only kind of neat thing. Everything else, it kind of sucks. We're all in the same boat. We've had to grind to get our content going. Brett brought up a great point about the one-on-one interviews and the face-to-face. I love building rapport with kids. I like following them from freshman to their senior years and seeing how they change up close, and it's a way to get information. And I travel covering UNC, and there used to be a lot more value on the road, especially in basketball, because the locker room opens up after the game and you just get a lot of information. It's a little more difficult to feel connected to what you're covering now than before. But you know what? We're managing. We're getting through.
We're still employed.
I can't wait for this stuff to end, but I get up every day knowing I have to grind that day to get work. There are no days off. People don't understand. I've taken 3 days off in the last 2.5 years. I've worked all the rest of the days. It's just the way it is. And now it's even more so because you have to get really creative when we're all dealing with the same bucket of intel, the same bucket of quotes, the same bucket of videos. We all got the same stuff. So you have to get really, really creative to get your work done. And I guess maybe it'll make us better in time. We'll see that in time. But I can't wait for this to end. I want to be around the kids. I want to be around the coaches, just to kind of feel like I'm more connected. So I feel like I'm doing a better job, and I'm not parroting what a lot of other people are doing out there.
All right. Why don't you give us a quick plug? You're with Tar Heel Illustrated. Give us the website. Give us your Twitter account. You've also got a fantastic Facebook. You're on Facebook, but you also have a fantastic YouTube channel where there's a bunches of video interviews. So go ahead and tell people where they can hear more of the stuff that they just got a flavor of today.
Well, TarHeelIllustrated.com. It's in the Rivals.com network, which is part of Yahoo Sports. We focus on UNC football and basketball and recruiting. We cover it heavily. It's a subscription site, but a lot of our stuff is free. But if you really want to get the nitty-gritty and you want to interact with me on a regular basis, you're going to have to pay a little bit because we got to be able to support the site. And like I said, we travel everywhere. Our Twitter handle is @Heel Illustrated, not Heels, but @Heel Illustrated. Everything we do, we post there. And our YouTube channel is Tar Heel Illustrated. We do a ton of videos. I do stand-up interview, 3-thing videos after every game, football and basketball. We do a ton of stuff during the week. We talk to a lot of recruits, and Dina King is our football recruiting person. She's sensational. David Sisk is a former AAU coach, longtime high school coach, college coach. Is our basketball recruiting guy. He is super plugged in. He breaks down film reviews from most of Carolina's games. So we have a ton of stuff going on our site. Like I said, every day I wake up, it's like that's the biggest day of the year because we've got so much going on.
All right, Brett.
Journal, it's nsjonline.com. We cover all the teams in North Carolina, not just the ACC. We do coverage of East Carolina and Charlotte and Appalachian State and the HBCU schools. Right now, if you check us out, we've got our superlatives for 2020. We've got our North Carolina Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, Team of the Year, Comeback of the Year, and everything else you can imagine. Next week, we're going to do our look ahead with predictions for what we think might happen in 2021. You can reach me personally on Twitter @BFried_ACC. That's BFRIED ACC. And whether I do it on purpose or not, I tend to poke the hornet's nest, so it's usually an entertaining follow.
So yes, folks, you do.
These are definitely the folks you want to follow. Andrew, Brett, I appreciate you doing. I'm Gene. Get down with the Chatham Journal. My thing, I concentrate primarily on photos, but on Twitter, you can follow us on ACC Football News. Please leave comments. Let us know what you thought about this hour and 20 minutes. And I personally, I don't care what you folks think. I had a great time because these two sports writers are some guys who cover ACC sports, and I always love sitting down with them, kibitzing and just talking about what's going on because, as you can tell, you will get a lot of information, and they know their stuff. They've been in the industry. So everybody, thank you. Folks, follow Brett, Twitter, North State Journal, got a bunch of stuff coming out. Support Andrew Jones on his stuff. We talked earlier. They're actually grown their subscription base with all this stuff going out because both these guys provide a lot of good, useful content. So, Brett, Andrew, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for listening in. Have a Merry Christmas for folks who celebrate Hanukkah. That ended in Sunday. Happy Hanukkah to you all. Happy New Year and happy holidays. Thank you so everybody.
Enjoyed it, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.